Carlson, and this is episode 28 of The Grief of Politics. I'm joined once again by Avin Carrot. Avin, how you doing?
Avin Carrot?
Yeah, I cut off your name.
Yeah, I'm not a carrot.
No.
Anyway, doing good. Good to be here.
Good. Yeah, this month was your choice, and you picked voter rights. Voters' rights. There's an apostrophe and an S on the end of one of those words.
Yes.
So we talked about it. We had dinner last night together. What we were talking about different things. So just immediately, obviously, I always say, like, what did you get from these articles immediately? But, like, there seemed to be a theme, even with, like, the Guardian articles and stuff, of, like, you know, you consider yourself somewhat conservative and everything. What do you think?
Yeah.
Why do you think there's this big push to suppress voters' rights? I mean, you know, one of the articles we're going to bring up later, the Hill article says this was in 2021, I think, that there was more than 250 voter suppression bills that have been introduced that year. And I think it said 39 of them or so had become law. So why was there this big push, do you think, to like restrict, like you heard it with the run up to the 2020 election about, you know, mail-in voting. And, you know, in Georgia, there was that big law where, I don't know if you heard, but they could actually fine you if people had to wait in long lines to vote. If you went along that line and handed out water, they could fine you, stuff like that. Like, why do you think there is this big push to...
So, I mean, first off, right, like you're adding an assumption that it is an attempt to suppress voting. And I would guess that the vast majority of people that put these bills forward and that support them would not call it voter suppression. They would call it protecting the integrity of the vote, you know, maintaining the constitutional integrity of voting, whatever they're going to say. So to blanket say it is voter suppression and that's what they're doing, why are they trying to suppress votes, I think is a little bit
Well, I mean, all the articles you shared, you know,
correct. No, and most of them all talk about it is there's a lot of laws and everything out there going along to suppress voting, and you know, if you read through this, there's a lot of action to restrict, limit, make more difficult the voting process, and the vast majority of it is centered around what happened through COVID with mail-in voting, right. And you know, Trump, the most vocal of all the Republicans on it, brought up the whole position that like mail-in voting
don't vote by mail, basically,
is too easy to manipulate. It's too easy to, you know, falsify, and so like we're ruining our votes for it. The interesting thing is,
did you ever? I mean, I don't know why they chose that issue. Did you ever read anything or hear anybody like in your conservative circles talk about why that was the thing? Because, you know, before that, mail-in voting is just part of the process. Like, vote by mail.
No. In Washington State, which is where I was going next, in Washington State, we are very accustomed to vote by mail, but most states don't. Most states, you still have to go in. You need an exception to vote by mail or a special reason to vote by mail. But because of COVID, a ton of states you know, pivoted into a vote by mail setup because they had to. Right. The other kind of interesting thing about it, maybe kind of cool, bragging rights for Washington State, whatever you want to say, is because we've been doing it for so long, and there are some other states that have as well, but because we've been doing it for so long with such a high level of integrity, a lot of states came to Washington to ask, how do you do it? So far, in fact, that the Biden administration, when they took over the White House, came to Washington State and recruited our Secretary of State, who managed this process for years, to come work for them, even though she is a lifelong Republican.
Well, I'll say this too. One thing researching this that I found too was like even our voter pamphlet, the paper with the Washington stamp on it and the flag, that basically gives you a pro and con for most of the major issues, and then lays out like districts and has, you know, a little bit of a bio for each, mostly for people running. That is not something that happens in other states. And that kind of blew me away because, again, like you said, you take a lot of stuff for granted. And I've always gotten them and I've always read them. And they do a pro and con on each issue, which I think, if you hear about a lot of these rural areas, they
don't do a pro and con. They do a point counterpoint.
Yeah, but I mean, still, if you're in an area that maybe doesn't have good internet access or anything, and you read this, like I've read it even when I feel strongly for or against an issue, I'll read the other side and go, this kind of does lay out why this would be bad or whatever. I'm still voting one way, but at least this is here. And I don't know
so,
if there's...
and to that point, right, like back to the original question you asked me, I think, reading through the articles, you really see the mass of movement to restrict. I read this predominantly as the Republican Party lost, and they're trying to restrict ease of access and means of access because there is a sense that mail-in voting is inherently more risky and more prone to fraud.
Okay, so going back to my point, though, do you think because other states believe this is new for them that they think that it is somehow inherently flawed, even though
100%?
You look at other states, like you said, us, and there's other states. I know the most of the coastal cities do it. So it's a thing where they think it's new and they think it's also bad. I know there's this feeling on the left that if the votes aren't going your way, you restrict them. So that's what conservatives are doing of hey, we're not winning these votes, so we have to stop people from voting. In
particular, those coming against it, right? The Hill article here. So just to name this, because we've mentioned it a couple of times, the article we're referencing was written by Yael Bromberg, who's an opinion contributor on 3/26/2021. So it's a couple years old. It's called Voting Rights Are Under Siege. The 26th Amendment could be their salvation. And this is on thehill.com.
Yeah.
And kind of the primary point that he's getting at is a lot of these bills, the vast majority of which are targeted towards younger voters because they're mostly targeted towards mail-in voting, and young voters were far more likely to come out and vote via mail-in voting.
We saw that in the midterms. It seemed like every state where there was a hot button issue, mostly abortion, but it seemed like the younger voters, like Gen Z, they came out in droves and they broke records in a lot of those places.
And I think making the argument that young voters came out because they could have mail-in ballots, I think is wrong. I think this most recent two elections, the midterm and 2020, I think also young voters very much resonated with a lot of the messaging. One, I don't think the majority of young voters are in support of Donald Trump. I think the majority of them are centrist to left. And that's just my own opinion. I have no evidence to back that. That's just a viewpoint of the world. And then on top of that, it was COVID, right? So a lot of these people who were motivated to vote because of the issues of the election, I think were also voting in the means they had access to, mail-in voting. I don't think it had anything to do with young people are lazy, but if you put the ballot in their hand, they're going to do it.
I think,
which is what this article I think is implying.
Yeah, I've also heard that even because I heard that on conservative media that young people are lazy and all this stuff, but I think they're kind of quieted on that because of the midterms, because all these this data's come out and say no, when they feel that they need, when they feel pushed to vote or there's a desperate need to vote, they will vote and they will come out in droves.
Correct. But you could still make the argument that they are lazy because they only came out to vote when mail-in ballots came in. And so if that is your mindset that young voters are lazy, mail-in ballots you might want to suppress the access to mail-in ballots.
Yeah, but too, there was other issues, with the midterms that people voted on. And it seems like, that those things are still going to be very much in play, I think, in the 2024 election,
Agreed. And I do think that is a big reason why we had younger voters turn out in much higher numbers. In my opinion, has less to do with the mail-in ballot was in their hands, they could do it. I think it had more to do with they were motivated by the issues at hand. They voted by mail only because that was the way they had access to the polls.
Yeah, and then it says right here, this is from the Hill article, it says the evidence is clear. These bills are in direct response to youth voter turnout in the 2020 election. A recent study of votes by mail ballots in Florida found that young voters were over 3 times more likely to need to cure their ballots compared to older voters. Rather than enact restrictive laws, we should work to modernize our election system. Again, I think because we're in Washington, we take a lot for granted. Can I just do a really weird shout out? Local libraries do a lot of stuff. They do tons of and they do taxes. And I think around the election, I saw like a town hall thing, if I remember right, in my local library. So if you don't.
But again, remember that's our local library system that we have here. And even for you, it's even more specific because your local library system is specific to Pierce County, Washington.
Well, there's the county library system, and I have the city. I'm with the city library system. So there's two, and for some reason, I'm like 1 digit away in my zip code from using the county one, which is ridiculous. I don't know. And my local city library also, I got an email from them that they have waived fines. So up until I think May, because of the economy, their board of directors decided to waive fines until I want to say May something. Anyway, the thing is, I this highlights to me that, I want to kind of read more, not just with voting. Obviously voting rights, but like the idea that what resources are available to other people. I think I told you a long time ago, I heard a interview with Stacey Abrams, love her, hate her, whatever, but she was talking about the voter thing in Georgia. And she mentioned that handout. And she mentioned our state. She said, we don't have anything like that. So you live in a rural part of Georgia, you may not know what you're voting for or have any idea what the issues are. But at least with something like that, you can sit at home, read that with the pro, for and against, pro, con, whatever you want to say, and okay, well, obviously this is where I land, So, I don't know if it's, I don't know. It is disheartening, but I think there is this pushback. So right here from the Hill article, it says the bills that were put into restrict votings. These bills are predicated on the big lie that the 2020 election was mired by election fraud. The big lie has been debunked, and not a single court has found merit to the claims despite over 50 election 2020 challenges. A joint statement by the Electors Infrastructure Government Coordinating Council on the Election Infrastructure Section Coordinating Executive Committees in November found that the election was the most secure in American history. There's no evidence that any voting system deleted or lost votes, changed votes, or was any way compromised. Similarly, the Departments of Justice and Homeland Security recently issued a joint statement finding no evidence that a foreign government manipulated any election results or otherwise compromised the integrity of the 2020 federal election.
Which I think is very important to highlight that. Two, I think part that they don't mention here that I also think is very important is that a lot of the courts that made these same decisions are ones that were appointed by Trump, or the justices.
It was Bill Barr's. The
Justice Department.
Yeah, the Justice Department. The head of the Justice Department said, I remember after the election, him like in December, January, going, all the reviews we've done, all the things. There's no,
and any reporting that talked about fraudulent votes have been found, yada yada yada, was in extremely small quantities, like 5. Yes, and like handfuls, like not even double digits.
Yeah, and then it aggregated to like a couple thousand.
Not maybe across the country.
Yeah. Like by the time you aggregate like 5 here and 5 in this county and 2 over here, it gets to like 100 or something.
Like infinitesimally small. And yet there was lots of arguments and cases that were brought up that were like anecdotal, like here we found this one, here we found that one, which is a bad thing. We don't want it. I think with mail-in voting, the real concern is that someone else is voting for another person. And in Washington State, we have a pretty robust security check on that because they actually do a really good job of signature screening. Yeah. And so for someone to steal my ballot, they also have to know my signature. They have to be able to copy it very well to steal my vote.
I think for me, what this comes down to also is like I still have this problem voting by mail is filling it out properly and being afraid that if I mismark, you don't mark it fully. And I think that's why, like, if there was a local, like a library where they're like, hey, we're just going to show people, you guys are all registered voters. We're just going to show you how to fill it out because if you haven't done it by mail and we want your vote to count, we want you to fill this out properly. So we're not going to talk about politics, about who you're voting for. We just want to show you the process of how this works. Because even today, I've done it for years. Every time I sit down, I'm like checking to make sure that I filled it out. Because I'm like, if I missed a
read the instructions thoroughly. You only do it every couple of years. You do it once every couple of years, right?
And then am I using a number 2 pencil? Oh, can I? Oh, I can't. I got to use a pen. You know, is this the right pen? Is this ink right? Like you start like second guessing yourself. You know.
The thing is, here in Washington State, though, like you can go into the website and confirm that your vote was actually received and counted.
Oh, I actually didn't know that.
Yeah. So that is something that here in Washington State, at least we can do. And I think as time goes by, that process improves, right? Blanket blocking it, I disagree with, right? I do think that there is a movement to try to maintain the integrity of it. And I support anything that's going to block, make more difficult for people to fraudulently or illegally vote. However,
even when Trump was in his whatever,
I also vehemently support that we need to improve access to voting. We need to simplify the process of voting, and we need to improve education around voting. So like everything you're saying so far, I agree with. I do think it's terrible that we're going out and trying to block these things. I've thought from the very beginning that these types of bills, because it was a huge hot button after the 2020 election. There was tons of conversation, which is why most of the articles I pulled are around that time frame. Well, really only 2. I thought I pulled 3. Apparently the third one was more like a bunch of like little small articles.
Yeah. They were informative though. Like one of the ones that you linked for the ACLU was about I forget the name of the case. I can look it up. But it basically said that the Supreme Court is going to oversee.
Sorry about that.
No, you're fine. The one that I looked at was, it just went away. Oh man. Let's see if I can find it. It was basically on the ACLU was about there was a court like Morris versus something in the Supreme Court and how that may change people's access to voting rights. The fact that I forget the state. There was a state that basically was saying that their electors can overrule the Constitution. That's what they want, but what's happening is the Supreme Court has to make a decision on it because they said, the ACLU is basically making the argument that nobody has the right to even ignore a constitution. No matter which way you believe politically, you're elected officials who uphold the constitution of your state. So you shouldn't be able to go, well, we don't believe this, so we're just going to ignore it. It's like, that's not how this works,
I just, we've talked about this many times before, and when you see people that are making those pushes, it is my absolute hope that people that genuinely consider themselves to be conservative, Republican, that have legislators at any level in their voting district that is saying that kind of stuff, it is my hope that they stand their principles and vote those people out. Because
another thing that
almost every conservative would tell you they believe in the Constitution. We need to follow the Constitution. And when you start just ignoring it selectively because it doesn't serve your right, or your purposes or desires, then man, things get bad.
Yeah, I mean that's the point. And then the other thing I think in the Guardian article that you brought up, I'll just do this now. It was like, why are U.S. voting rights under threat, and how is the filibuster related? The filibuster gets brought up a lot. I'm kind of sick. If I hear filibuster at least 5 more times, I might lose my mind. Anyway, who wrote this? Did I miss who wrote it? I don't think it's got it's an explainer, so I don't wonder if their staff wrote it to be like, here's what's going on. But yeah, what they're also doing too is like right here. So this is talking about restriction of voting. Republicans in Florida and Georgia, for example, limited or prohibited the use of mail-in ballot drop boxes widely used in 2020 to ensure ballots made it back to election officials in time. Some states also impose new identification requirements for voters, both when they request and return a ballot. Despite no evidence of widespread fraud, lawmakers in Georgia passed measures that prohibited providing food or water to people standing in line to vote. And they say later the reason this is they believe, I want to see the exact quote they said. It was like highlighted on here. Oh, and that's the end of the article. It says right here, in Georgia, lawmakers have defended the ban on providing food or water to people in line by saying it's needed to prevent unlawful electioneering, which I didn't hear. I'm going to click on the link right here. Basically,
so the argument for this is, I remember there was a lot of discussion about this. The argument on this is that people are, buying votes by giving water bottles that have, vote Bob on them, whatever, whomever it may be, or food that has that. And then they're like, oh, yeah, let me give you a bottle of water. You're voting for Bob, right? And so there can be some manipulation in that or swaying in that. And these are people that are not really regulated that could be out doing this. And so they could say anything they dang well please.
Yeah.
Bob's opponent murders babies, right?
Yeah,
like he literally just like goes to the hospital and kills them in their beds.
Yeah, some of the people brought up in the lawsuit were, from the liberal side was like, hey, these are churches that do like outreach. So they go to these voter lines. People have to stand in line for hours because, again, there's no mail-in voting. So you have to go to a polling station, which is a big deal. Which, again, there's talk also of making vote a national holiday, the election day or whatever. So you can go, you have time to vote. I'm kind of for that because I would say, too, your work could do something of like, hey, get this sticker and it's a holiday. If you don't, then we're gonna whatever. I think I don't know, I think all that kind of stuff, and then people don't have to like get off work and try to stand in line for 3 hours and all that kind of stuff. So I think another thing too,
right, and I think that goes back to the point I was making, right? Making voting more accessible and easier for people to do. The United States of America, sadly, oh, by the way, the article is Why Are U.S. Voting Rights Under Threat and How is a Filibuster Related on The Guardian. The author, it's kind of off to the side, so I see why you missed it. It's not where we would normally find it. It's Sam Levine in New York, and it was published on Tuesday, the 11th of January, 2020.
Oh, right there. Yeah. I don't know why.
Sorry, I just glanced over and saw that. Yeah.
It's okay. I do like right here, it says, will these new laws actually help Republicans? And I think this is pretty amazing. It was really informative. It's not clear that new restrictions will benefit the GOP. A study from March 2021 found that vote by mail neither boosted nor helped Democrats. That said, there is a deep concern that Republicans appear to be pushing restrictions in response to an election where more Americans than ever, including a high number of non-whites, people cast their ballots. They don't really back up a study or anything. Oh, actually, they do up here. Sorry. This is things why Republicans are doing this. Republicans also point to polling showing that voter ID is broadly supported, and to record high turnout as evidence. Voter suppression isn't really a problem. Voting rights groups point out that while turnout was up in 2020, there is still persistent gaps between white and non-white voters. About 70.9% of white voters cast a ballot in 2020 compared to 58.4% of non-white, according to the Brennan Center. So, yeah.
So I do think, like, one, we make a good point. Two, I actually think this election was one where things were at risk. I think, I hate to say this, I think the majority of Americans maybe care about politics, but not enough to get out and vote most of the time. Because usually we've got two candidates that aren't really incredibly motivating, and we don't really see a whole lot, right? The election between
we do general, and we don't do like local, and we'll do like national general. Like some ballots you don't turn in. I've tried to get better. There has been times I've skipped, but I'm trying to get better about once it comes in. I sit down, like I make time to sit down and fill it out because all that stuff is so important. You get a lot of like, hey, why is this person running unopposed? Like, I'm not saying this is incredibly political, but like this person's been. I've seen this, this person's name on the ballot 4 times unopposed. So what's going on in District 4 or whatever? Why isn't there anybody running, for the...
Because it's a bottom of ballot thing that people aren't really paying attention to, and it's not sexy, and people aren't interested in it. And that is the unfortunate thing about kind of American voters, right? For the leader of the democratic world, as we like to think of ourselves, like we have one of the lower voter turnouts. We're not the lowest, I don't think, but we definitely have a lower voter turnout than a lot of other countries that do democratic elections. Yeah. And I think a lot of it is because our, major voting events tend to be kind of blasé.
Well, also, if you have to take time off or not take time off work, but if you have to stand in line for 3 hours and you can only do it after work, but the polling station, I think they stay open pretty late, but still you're in line, you're waiting, and people can be like, I don't want to wait in line for 3 hours to...
I don't think that is the norm.
No, I'm just saying in parts of the country, there's parts of the country that,
Right. We highlight these things, but I really honestly think these are the outliers, right? Like this is the situation where we have massive amounts of voting going on around the country, right? Hundreds of millions of Americans vote in every election, right? Tens of millions. I don't know the actual number, but we'll say hundreds of millions. And it all gets done surprisingly quick. I do think, I don't remember which article it was, but one of these articles made the point, like, this is a big reason we should be technologically advancing. We should be working to advance our election process and system, right? Like the Dominion voting machines and everything that's going on with Fox News around their defamation suit, right?
Yeah,
like those help us tally our votes more quickly. They help us get our information more quickly, and they tend to be extremely secure. Their technology, they can break, and there are risks around it. And yes, they can have other risks, but you put proper security in place, and it makes it really stinking difficult to mess with those things.
I will say, without dipping into next month's topic, the thing with Fox News that I find fascinating, and I mean, we're spoilers. I'm going to talk about the media for my choice next month, but what I find fascinating about this is there is, for a long time, it doesn't matter, MSNBC, whatever, you have the feeling of like, wait, are these people telling the truth? And with Fox News, there's a big thing of like, I don't think they're telling the truth. And I'll say this, at least with
because you're Gilbro and you don't like Fox News, and so inherently you don't believe them.
I'm saying generally though too. I mean, even CNN and stuff, I'm like, that doesn't sound right. But with Fox News, there's been this thing of, whatever. But with this, there's actually an account now of like, there's if you're going to say these things, you need to back them up. You can't just go and say this stuff, And I think what's coming out in Discovery, what's been reported by other outlets about this is like, you have to be very careful now about integrity and saying what you mean. And, I have problems with CNN and stuff, but I do think, people that I listen to and respect, again, it comes down to a good faith actor, and I think there is people on the left that are good faith, and I think there are people who are not. And on the right, I think there's a lot of people that they are not. And there's a few people on the right that I think are, and so it's one of those things where, this also, I think, brings in voters' rights, because it's like, there was a lot of things of like, hey, I'll drop off your ballot for you, which is legal in some states. And that was seized upon by some conspiracy theorists of like, see, they're making fake ballots or dropping ballots off and stuff like that, but it's
truckloads of ballots never made it, got turned in.
Right.
And there was evidence of that.
Well, but the video I saw with like the 1,000 Mules documentary, 10,000, whatever that one was, like somebody dropping off a few, and then they would only show footage from like one polling station. So like, see, this person dropped off several ballots. This is ballot dumping. And you're like, well, where's the other video footage of them at the other polling station dropping, the other mail-in thing,
Well, and again, I mean, we've talked about this before in our January 6th podcasts. I think there's at least initially was a feeling of like, this many voters don't actually turn out. That many people couldn't have voted for Joe Biden. So there is this sense that like, there has to be fraud. There has to be fake votes. There has to be votes that are people that are dead, or, people that never vote, they're being voted for by someone else, right? And again, I think in this particular, the 2020 election in particular, I think that it was a mobilization.
Yeah,
people were at home. They had way more time to pay attention to politics. Yeah. Trump is extremely polarizing. You love him or you hate him. There's very little in the middle, and those that are in the middle are swallowing and voting Republican because they're committed to the party and not the man.
Yeah, and remember, Trump again told people that, like you said earlier, that mail-in voting is fraudulent. Mm-hmm. So if you're listening to that and you believe in what he says, you're going, well, then I can't vote. And then that was actually brought up, I think, in front of Pence after the election. He was giving a speech, and he said, maybe not Pence, but somebody, maybe it was Trump. Somebody on the right was in Trump's orbit was saying, you can't trust mail-in voting. And someone says, well, then how are we ever going to vote again? Like one of their people that believes their message was that, and they're like, okay, then I just won't vote, basically. And they're like, no, we need you to vote. Yeah. But it's like, okay, well then, if you live in a state that it's difficult to vote, you're like, wait, but mail-in voting was an option, and now you don't want me to do that, so now I have to do the other thing, which is time-consuming, and I don't get it. I may not be able to do it because if a polling station closes and I'm in line for too long, I don't know.
But then, sort of the flip side on all this mail-in ballot stuff, but none of these articles actually directly address. I did find an op-ed piece that was written by some rando that I didn't want to share.
Rando, it's like my website. You're like, well, Joe, you wrote an article about.
Yeah, no, it didn't have any weight behind it or any credibility, so I didn't want to bring it up. But I guess maybe I should have, because they did make some kind of valid points, or at least his argument pointed to issues that are also valid for the reason you want to do it, right? They talk about, in the Guardian article, Republicans showing that support for voter ID is very broad. It is. I think the vast majority of Americans feel like, having to show your ID to prove who you say you are, who you say you are, is a valid thing. The counterpoint to that is a lot of people that live in rural areas that are in poverty don't have valid government IDs. Okay, well, let's simplify the process to verify that you are who you say you are.
I remember having my card after I was able to vote. They give you that. They give you like a
voter registration card.
Yeah, because it's like it's got to be tied to your address. And I think I filled it out when I moved, but that was so long ago. I don't know where that card is.
Yeah. So like, I think the vast majority of Americans, feel like that's a reasonable request. And that's hard to do in a mail-in scenario. How do I prove I am who I say I am in a mail-in scenario? Now, in Washington State, we've got a very robust system for checking signatures against it and making sure. We look for double votes. There's a lot of stuff that they're doing to confirm that you are who you say you are in a mail-in context. And that was a big question when we started doing mail-in ballots 20 years ago.
Yeah. I mean, part of me, like, I don't want to just totally rip on Republicans, but I do understand if something's new, you're like, whoa. But the counterpoint to that is, well, listen, there is states, even though I don't agree with like Washington's blue, but you're like, they haven't had a problem there. You know, they've been doing this for a long time.
You don't agree that Washington's a blue state?
Well, I mean, I agree. Like, I'm saying if that person is a conservative, they're like, I don't agree with their politics there, but the process seems to be in place.
Got it.
You know what I mean? Like, I don't, whatever. To me,
yeah. Well, and honestly, our voting system was all basically overseen and set up by a Republican. Kim Wyman held the position of Secretary of State and oversaw the voting process and the voting security for years. I don't know how long she was in that position, but it was a really long time, and was the only person who was listed as Republican that could consistently win in Washington State.
Well, you set up a function. If you set up a functioning voter system, people tend to be like, "Well, they're all right." Like, I don't agree with them all the time, but we got all this, so yeah.
Right. Well, and it's a nonpartisan post, but a lot of accusations and a lot of conversation after the 2020 election came back to like, well, they've got bias, and so they're setting things up in a biased way. But like, that's not the intention of people that are doing this. They want, like, people that believe in this system want it to be as fair, as clear, as safe, as accessible, and as secure as it possibly can be.
Yeah, I mean, even when Trump, brought up all the 50 lawsuits or whatever, part of me was like, okay, well, let's see what, if they find something, then they find something, and then they didn't. So, as talking to the few, not just you, but other conservative friends I have, it's like, so what do we do now? Or like, if everybody's telling you there's nothing here, and I get some of it, I do understand, like the idea of like, if we don't trust institutions anymore, you're like, well, who cares what they said if they found nothing? I don't trust them, so I don't trust that they tell me they didn't find anything, But I mean, to me, that's just a spiral of cynicism that will get it's like, okay, then nothing's ever going to, like, that's just a negative spiral of, negativity, really. You're never going to go up from that. If you're like, well, none of this, I don't know, I could go on a rant, but I mean, I'm ranting. But my thing is like, if there's evidence to say that this works in certain places, if I even, whatever my party affiliation, I'd say, what can we use for that system in my state that would help us, You
would hope that people do that. You would hope.
Yeah. You would hope that happens, This makes me actually want to research this more to see if there is like some weird governmental body or some nonprofit saying, hey, we're trying to do in these states where we've seen it successful, we're trying to get that happen in other states. Like, I don't know if that's a thing or not.
I'm guessing individual states are investigating and working with other states that have already done it successfully and trying to figure out, pick and choose the things that they like and don't like. I think one of the other reasons that you see some of these rules and restrictions too is there's the attempt to block, illegal aliens from getting access to the polling station. I feel like a lot of Republicans are very threatened by states that are doing that. Mm-hmm. New York City has passed a law that allows resident aliens, or maybe it's non-resident. I think it's non-resident aliens. Like you are here on a visa, but right. You are not a citizen, and you'll go back to your home country. There's a bill that was passed that allows them to now vote, but doesn't allow illegals.
I will say that, like, the few people I follow online that are like have visas say that is a really difficult process, and they're here for years. And so, if you live here for 4, 5, 6 years, whatever the visas last for, and you're like, no, this is also, I don't want to get joint citizen. I may go home, but like I do feel strongly in these, these things.
You aren't a citizen. The Constitution is very clear. Voting is for citizens.
Well,
and in New York's case, they're not allowed to vote in any federal election. It is specific to local, and they have a completely separate ballot for those elections for that purpose. But there is a push among Democrats to open up to illegal aliens because they live here. They should have a right to vote, is the argument, as well as non-resident aliens. And citizenship is central to voting, right? Like, you are here, you are a citizen. Like, if you want to vote, go through the process of becoming a citizen. If you don't want to become a citizen, we're sorry you don't like our politics, but you kind of chose to live here this way. I can't go to England and vote in English national elections.
Yeah, that'd be weird. I will say I did have a coworker that got naturalized, became a citizen, and he showed me the naturalization papers, and he said, now I can complain about everything. I go, well, you can complain like everybody else, but now you can vote and do something. Like, you can do something about it now. And he started laughing.
Right.
And he was like, yeah, I can now, So it was pretty funny. I was like, everybody complains about politics no matter where you live. Like, when I was in China, I wasn't a citizen. I was like, what's going on? I don't know what's going on.
Are there really free and clear elections in China, Joe?
I would say no. I would say no. That should be a topic. Maybe I'll write that down. I don't think we've talked
Xi just fires anyone or gets rid of by whatever means necessary that disagrees with him from his government.
One thing, I don't know if the articles you...
I'm not sure I understand.
Whoa.
Sorry.
Siri's part of the podcast now. That's great. No problem with the AI.
No affiliation, no sponsorship.
Yeah, no sponsorship whatsoever. One of the things, I don't know if your articles brought it up, was maybe it was the Guardian one, the idea that part of this problem, and you're hearing this, both parties talk about it, but the left talking about it a little more, is the election officials in different states and how that's been a big ballot measure in different states about maybe getting someone on the inside, because there was I'm trying to see if I can find, maybe it was the Hill article. Anyway, there was an article saying that basically the people that oversaw the elections, it was kind of a low level civil servant job, and you just kind of, you obviously did your job well, but made sure you did it to the best of your ability, but it wasn't something that was politicized. It was just like, I just audit votes, right?
They tend to be very nonpartisan as far as how it works, which nonpartisan is, it's difficult. How do you not have bias?
Yeah, I don't know where it was, but basically they're saying that now what's happening is, and I'm sure it happens on the left, but it's been reported mostly on the right. They're putting people on the ballot that will be like, I'm just going to rubber stamp this for our candidate, or I will block this, until we basically get our way. And
that's discussion. That's the discussion on the filibuster,
right? But also on getting someone in a voter, like in a local office that.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Right.
Like, we're just not going to vote on it. We're just not going to vote. You need to have so many votes to approve or move forward, so we're just not going to be involved.
Right, but
yeah.
I'm also talking about like local elections, when you get an election official that has a political affiliation, that says, I'm going to use this to the utmost whatever and say, okay, that's not my candidate. I mean, Steve Bannon did a podcast that I unfortunately listened to about we're going to get as many people of our people in these local polling stations to, say like basically filibuster on that side, if that makes sense, of like, we're not allowed, like, we're just going to say that this ballot is, we need to audit this ballot. We need to audit this ballot. So that just slows the process down, I'm going to do it X amount of times. So everything just becomes like quicksand and we can't get anywhere, And I think there is a troubling thing, but I'll say with the 2020 election, that seemed to not happen. Most people that had an inkling of that didn't get into office. I think maybe one or two out of the 20, I think we talked about it in our midterm episode. The people that were headed in that direction didn't win election. So it kind of got rejected by voters. Really.
For the most part. I mean, you ended up in 2022, in 2020, getting in some election officials that were a little bit more extreme on that kind of stuff, but not many. Most of them didn't win.
I heard
and I think that's because the vast majority of Americans, want election integrity. I think the vast majority of Americans, not all, and not vocal majority, I think the vast majority do believe that the election was secure.
Yeah. I think, too, as time goes on, we could talk about this in another episode, but we talked about it at dinner last night. There's these things that keep getting brought up, like Trump brings them up, and even conservative, pollsters and election people and like staffers are like, hey, we need to move on. Like this idea that you're sinking into these. Yeah. Like he'll still bring up that he was on Tucker Carlson. He brought up that it was still stolen. So you're like, okay, well,
we've talked about Trump a lot. The man is completely egotistical. He can't imagine anything other than himself. And so his worldview doesn't allow him to believe that he lost. It has to be rigged.
Yeah, he has to be he's a winner.
It is, in my assessment of the man, of everything that I've seen of him for as long as he has been in the media, is he is incapable of believing that he can lose anything.
To be clear, I heard this a long time ago, and they were just talking about presidents in general. Everybody that wants to be president has a streak of narcissism, because if you think you could run a country, there's got to be something inside you that's like just a streak of narcissism. Even if you agree with their politics, you're like, oh, you're the one? And they're like, I'm the one. I have the vision. And you're like, ugh. But I think Trump has like that streak plus a little bit more. Anyway, back to voter.
Do my own Trump impersonation.
Yeah, that right there. The thing that I kind of, we talk about it, I think last episode about hope and stuff like that. I think what gives me, everybody's like, oh, there's no point in everything. I'm like, no, but you're really seeing like a check and a balance going on, when
our system is doing what it's supposed to do.
Yeah.
The courts are checking. The electorate is doing their job.
Yeah, and people are showing up to vote, so they're exercising their right, saying this is not acceptable. You could disagree with them, but again, and I think there was a big talk before the midterms about voting and stuff about, will these be big enough issues to force people to vote? And we've seen that happen. The
Correct.
red wave that was supposed to happen, we talked about in midterm episodes, but like there is this, even if you don't agree with Democrats or whatever, that's how the system works. And that's how it worked when Trump got elected. People did not like Obama, thought that it was bad, and they checked that and put Trump in office. So there's like, to me, everything's still kind of working, and we have to keep the framework in there to make sure that continues to happen. That, even if I disagree with, like, if Trump wins again, it's like, well, I had problems with Biden. That's how this works. Let's make sure this framework is in place so, it doesn't go off the rails.
I do think the 2016 election, though, did kind of highlight the point I was making, that a lot of Americans just don't go out to vote because they're not motivated to. And I think the Democratic Party shot themselves in the foot by putting Hillary Clinton forward. She wasn't a polarizing figure. She wasn't an interesting figure, right? Like, she was just the next one in line to be raised up by the party. And what ended up happening is, the party put her forward, but the voters in the Democratic Party were like, meh.
Yeah,
and so they weren't motivated to get out, and the message of the risk of having Trump in office wasn't strong enough, right? There was a lot of discussion before Trump got voted in 2016 around Well, we don't know. We have no idea who he's going to be. He's never been in office.
I brought it up before, but I called you after the election, and he was like, "Okay, we're not going to go after Hillary. That's not." Remember, he made that speech, and he goes, "I'm not going to go after." I was just trying to win. And I called you. I said, "Well, let's see what happens. Let's see. He may have turned a corner."
And then afterwards in 2020, even though you could argue, and I think rightfully so, that Biden is even less of an interesting figure and less of a motivating figure, that people came out because they finally were like, oh man, we should have listened in 2016 of the risks that involved.
Yeah.
And so that brought out the Democratic base that hadn't come out in 2016.
Yeah, I was watching that podcast I told you about last night. I don't want to mention.
And the independents that didn't come out because they just were like, meh.
Yeah, well, that podcast I was listening to, these are like Republican pollsters or whatever, and they're on the radio, which it blows me away when you hear people are still. Anyway, I'm like, AM, really? That's it. But they were talking about, Biden was. People weren't voting for Biden. They were not voting for Trump. Like that was their whole thing.
No, they were voting against.
Yeah, they're voting against Trump, and the thing is, it's like that may happen again because Trump
almost guarantee it will.
Yeah, and everybody's
almost.
Everybody's talked about. Well, Trump may win the nomination, but not the general. And they that podcast they did, and I did like the back and forth because they kept saying how great Trump was, and they're like making fun of Biden, and I'm like, well, yes, Biden is old, and he's not good, right? But like if you just listen to Trump, like to me, it's almost like I don't know, it seems to be two sides of the same coin. Biden is quiet, doesn't make sense, stumbles over his word, doesn't seem like he's there all the time. And Trump just rambles, like you'll ask him one question and it's 7 minutes. And you're like, I asked you one, you know what I mean? And it goes like 9 topics. So you're like, okay, so this person, I don't know. It doesn't. Anyway, we're almost done. What do you want to plug, Avin? Because I have a little bit of news.
There's news. All right. Well, I'm going to plug the same thing I always do. Your Agent Guide. I've got my YouTube channel. I'm a realtor here in Washington State.
You got a camera?
I mean, that's not really a plug, but I did get a new camera, which anyone watching the video will have seen. There was a moment where it disconnected a few minutes ago or a little while ago. So still learning. Apologize for that. But for a plug, Your Agent Guide. I'm a realtor here in Washington. I do help people with buying and selling homes, but my primary focus is connecting people with talented agents in their area, anywhere in the United States. Or for that matter, just answering questions. Anyone wants to know anything, I'm here to help. That is my primary motivator for this. If I can be helpful, I feel like I've won.
Yeah, I mean, again, every time you do a link, it's pretty informative, and I liked it. And also, I mean, the big announcement is videos of this are going up on Spotify now. I tried to do a bunch to begin with, so it isn't just an audio podcast on Spotify anymore. It is an actual video podcast. The thing is, when I initially did it, a lot of stuff came back aired, and I believe it was because I was trying to do too much. I tried to do it all in like a day or 2 days, and so I'm really doing one a day. And I'm going backwards from the newest episode. We're on to episode 21 is a video episode. I re-uploaded it. It's good. So you should be, and I'll do one a day. I have to dig out a hard drive because I stored a bunch of them on a hard drive, but I'll do that. So all the video will be up on Spotify. If you guys want to just listen to the audio again, subscribe on either Apple iTunes, and we're on Amazon Music now in their podcast section. So if you want to write to us, you can write to us. Yeah, you can write to us at gwgpodfellows@gmail.com. Tell us it's about the grief of politics because I use that address for another podcast. And I'm trying to think of what else. That's a big news. We actually got a little bit more traffic too with the videos being up. I think we have like one subscriber. We have more listeners. We were getting like no data, and now we have data. So that's a step in the right direction. Data is good. Yeah, I'm trying.
Thank you to those that are listening. Thank you to those that are sharing.
Yeah. Again, if this is your first time listening to us, Avin and I just try to, we just try to be actually civil when it comes to.
Try.
Yeah, we try to be civil. We got to rib each other once in a while. We've done each other too long to not rib each other. But anything else, Avin, before we leave? I spoiled it, but next month we will be talking about the media, and
Yeah,
we'll
yeah.
do left and right and all that because I, we both of us don't. I don't know about. I do mildly distrust the mainstream media, but I think what's happening on either side with like the right or the left is listening too. Like YouTube's a big deal with like getting political commentators,
Yeah.
and there's a big difference between what you see, in my opinion, what you see on the left and what you see on the right for political commentators. So yeah, that'll be next month. Anything else, Avin, again before we leave? I forget. I cut you off.
Nope, that's it for me.
Okay. Well, have a good month, and we will talk to you guys again next month.